almost all ancient books, especially mystical ones, were spread in handwritten form. People spent hours copying texts manually, and of course, they made mistakes. Sometimes, a scribe would even change a phrase intentionally, especially during translation. For example, when translating the Hebrew Bible, someone might think, "This sounds better," and alter the meaning. By the 2nd century, Greek versions of the Old Testament began to differ from each other more than they differed from the Hebrew original. Various schools emerged, like the Alexandrian school, offering their own translations. Some even denied the human nature of Christ, which influenced which texts were included. At the same time, after the destruction of the temple, the Jewish community began forming its own canon. The Talmud records debates, like whether to include the Book of Esther. Some said yes, others no. Many books from the Jewish Old Testament survived only because Christians preserved them, especially those celebrating heroism and war. Jews, focused on spiritual survival without a state, excluded them. Christians, building a state religion, embraced them. Everything changed in 313 CE, when Emperor Constantine declared Christianity beneficial for the Roman Empire. It wasn't yet the official religion, but it gained imperial favor. Constantine proposed a church modeled after the empire, with a head bishop in Rome, later known as the Pope. Before this, Christians had no temples. They met in homes, read scrolls. But Constantine began building churches, often on pagan sites. He presided over the Council of Nicaea, though he remained a pagan until the end of his life. He commissioned 50 complete copies of the Bible. This led to the creation of the Vatican, Sinai, and Alexandrian codices. The Alexandrian was the most complete. To make it, they needed 360 sheepskins. Christians began writing on both sides of the parchment, unlike Jews, who used only one. Even these codices differed, in book order and in text. Later, Pope Damascus asked Jerome to create a Latin translation. Jerome traveled to Bethlehem, studied Greek copies, and realized they were too inconsistent. So he decided to translate from Hebrew. He said, "Veritas Hebraica," truth is with the Hebrews, and created the Vulgate. But Hebrew is a complex language. It has no vowels, no spaces, and is full of allegory. Translating it is no easy task. For example, the word crown was mistranslated as horns, which is why Michelangelo's Moses has horns. Or the phrase, "I feel good in the land of Israel." When translated literally, it sounds like I'm in scarlet. Mistakes piled up, especially in Russian translations, which were based on Greek versions already full of errors. Meanwhile, Jews were also revising their texts, sometimes changing them to avoid Christian interpretations. By the 9th century, they decided to create a unified canon. Everything extra, removed. They even aligned the text so precisely that a student could recite an entire line, just from hearing the first few words, down to the exact letter and spacing. The ancient Hebrew text, especially the Torah, was written without spaces, without vowels, and filled with layers of hidden meaning. To understand it, one must know the tradition, the context, the language, and even then, it's easy to make mistakes. We discovered that the Russian translation was heavily distorted. It came through the Greek version, which already contained errors. So first mistakes were made in Greek, then translated into Russian, resulting in even greater distortions. When you compare it to the original Hebrew, it becomes clear. Some of the errors were extremely serious, due to the similarity of the Hebrew words. Jerome, the creator of the Latin translation, faced the same issue. He realized that the Greek copies were inconsistent and chose to translate directly from Hebrew. But at the same time, Jewish scribes weren't idle. They were also rewriting their texts and sometimes modifying them to prevent Christian interpretations, such as the concept of the Trinity. By the 9th century, Jews recognized the need for a unified canon. Their manuscripts had diverged too much. They decided to gather all texts, remove the excess, and create a single version from which all others would derive. And not just word for word, the placement of words on the line mattered. A student had to know the entire line from its beginning. It was almost mystical precision. If a quill passed over a scroll, you had to know every word it touched. Christians, seeing this, began retranslating from the Hebrew text. But a debate arose: should they translate from the Hebrew original or from the Greek Septuagint? Some argued that the Greek translation was older than the Hebrew original, because Jews had later revised their texts. Yet the Greek manuscripts differ from each other even more than the Hebrew ones. In the Orthodox tradition, two biblical canons emerged: the Old Church Slavonic canon, based on the Greek text via Cyril and Methodius; the Synodal canon, based on the later Hebrew text. Later, at the University of Paris, work began on a Latin canon. The Bible became a book that could be borrowed, hence the word bibliotheca, library. But for the Bible to become a mass-distributed book, two revolutions were needed: the invention of paper and invention of printing. Before that, a single scroll could require 360 sheepskins. How could demand be met? Even 50 copies wouldn't be enough for one city, where most people were illiterate. But there was another obstacle. The Catholic Church. Pope Gregory VIII declared that the Bible should not be translated or widely distributed. It had to remain a mystery, to be respected more deeply. Services were allowed only in 3 languages: Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. Translations into vernacular languages were forbidden. Then came a moment of revolution. Martin Luther began translating the Bible into German. He declared that every person should have the right to read the Bible on their own. That changed the entire course of Christian history.